Stanton, later this month, I'm going to Ottawa, Ontario, and I'm working with our partner Dahi, who's flying in from Ireland to do a whole round of meetings and throughout Canada, actually. All transcontinental. He's actually going all the way from Montreal, making his way across to and then going across the border to Seattle. Um, but I'll meet him in Ottawa, where we've been working with a program that is so down to earth that it's no wonder we met each other, I suppose. And this organization is a group of it's a street team, and it's people who have uh, gone through the process of being addicted, uh, getting over it, and they're working with peers. They call themselves peer counselors in a variety of different places where people are trying to secure housing and make way in life. They're a harm reduction organization, and they like the work that we're doing. Now, we've been invited because I think this is like the polite Canadian thing to do. They have they have told their brother and sister programs about us and said, "You should let these guys come and talk to you about what they do. It'll be interesting." And I
Now you're
think
being a little overly modest because we can name the organization Ottawa Inner City Health. Its director and his board, whatever it is, his name is Rob Boyd. There's they're spending a little money on us. They've decided, oh, these guys have an approach that's going to be helpful for us.
we've trained their employees. One of the things that I think appeals to them is that they're not a rehab or a treatment practice. They're a harm reduction practice. They're trying to help people better their lives, but they have this emphasis or this interest in drugs and addiction in that space. How do we help people who are in that realm improve their lives in that realm while they're doing all the other life improving stuff? And how do we do it? Well, harm reduction. We make sure that we meet them where they are and help build them up from wherever that is. Our program sort of has the body of something that looks like treatment. So when you there's a stuck point where you can have a peer-to-peer interaction and you can help people get on in their lives. But I think the education that we did with them was something around, well, where do we go from here? We've connected, we're building relationships. I don't know, I can't exactly tell everyone I meet they should be a peer counselor too. Where do we go? How do we help them build their lives up? And so that's where our program comes in. We say, here's how you can do it. And it's practical, and you don't have to go through the treatment ringer or be abstinent forever. And I think there are other programs who might get benefit from that.
The thing that always runs through my mind is a big thing that you hear in harm reduction circles is we should get all of these people into treatment. That's their concept.
Mm-hmm.
And our whole framework is you're not going to get, to some extent, the entire homeless population or native population is at risk. It's crazy to say, well, why don't we put them all in rehab? That makes no sense. It's never going to happen. It's impossible. You can't do it. You can't even deal with the people that want to be in rehab now. And so we're shifting treatment from here to there, to them and where they live.
There's
So anyhow,
this got brought up in the conversation before I let you make a transition.
go ahead.
This actually was brought up. There are two factors at play. On the one hand, there's some pressure if you're an organization to get people to treatment because that means something. Like you said, get everyone into treatment. And then what? I don't know. The treatment people will figure it out. Well, the Ottawa Inner City Health has understands that you don't just place someone in treatment and then their lives get like a suitcase and chip off somewhere. Usually it doesn't work. And so, no, I don't want to just put somebody in someone else's hands, even if I could get them there, and then say, well, it probably won't work, but best of luck to you. No, we'd rather do the courtesy act of helping them improve their lives. So, on one, this is like relieves a little bit of pressure. If you're an organization, aren't you supposed to be getting people into treatment? Well, we kind of have this treatment-esque thing. It's the life process program. But on the other hand, it's not treatment like you throw somebody through the funnel of a treatment center and hope they're spit out whole the other side. It's actually we can work with them in this treatment kind of thing.
and it's less expensive. And I had a good line somewhere in my life. You brought this up in the beginning of this conversation, is when we're delivering treatment. And I mean, that could be, you could start your workshop by asking that question, and I'm not telling you what to do. And you could say to people, is this treatment or isn't this treatment? Because we sort of go back and forth on it. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And one of my lines somewhere in my life was, we're the treatment program for people that don't like treatment programs.
That's a good one.
So anyhow, I get a phone call or an email, I forget, from a producer at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. And they want to interview me, and I naturally assume they're all about this thing in Ottawa. But no, that's not true.
We haven't had an outpouring of requests to meet or work with us from Canada at this point, so it would be a natural idea.
We haven't
This
made a
must be
presentation yet. Well,
right.
Except for some well, a couple people in Ottawa, including Rob Boyd and the Inner City Ottawa Inner City Health group, and we're possibly doing something in Montreal. So we're pretty big in Canada.
But this interview request is totally independent of all of that.
So I said, "Oh, you're interviewing me about that?" And they said, "Oh no, we're interviewing you, the producer and the interviewer, because we very much identify with your non-disease approach." And I'm old and a little more cynical than Zach and Daihi. They're the positive side of the equation. I've had an awful lot of people tell me how much they agree with me. And Zach actually does agree with me. Thank God I found him. But then when I talk with them, I recognize, I mean, I have one guy call me up. He wanted me to be his mentor. He's abstinent. And his plan is that his son, his small son, will never, ever taste alcohol in his life. And I said, I don't know why you picked me out as your mentor. I'm really not good in that job you just described. So I'm being interviewed by this person. We're talking, and he's asking me my views. And I accuse him of actually kind of embracing medical disease notions. At the same time, he's saying he's not an AA guy. At the same time, he says, no, I'm not doing that. I don't believe in those things. And then we have the conversation. I always try with interviewer to get the conversation back. I know he's not an AA. So I talk about him. Did you ever smoke? And he quit smoking. And he describes that process. I go through it with him, how imbalanced he got to a point in his life where, you know, it made sense for him to quit, and then he quit. And so we moved on. I wasn't fully aware at that point that he had also quit drinking. And here's how he described his quitting drinking. He wasn't obviously an alcoholic. He's had a family with 2 kids who are now older. He's been married all this time. He never really had an alcoholic demeanor. And so when he decided to quit drinking, he said, well, I had to make a leap because I was functioning all that time. He said, I was protected by having a high tolerance. And so, boing, I said, wait a second. So you're a non-medical biological guy, and your explanation for your life is that you have a high inbred tolerance for alcohol. That's how you think about it. The way I think about it is that you've been a person who's been attached to your wife and children, and the research shows, and I cite Gene Amen, that people in secure family situations are more likely to change. Even if they haven't changed before, they're more likely to change later. But he's backfilled to decide that his life and belated balancing act was abnormal because he has a high tolerance for alcohol. So I switched into talking about, but I say most people get over addiction. So to say, well, they have some imaginary, there's nothing he's ever done. They have no test to say that you've got a high tolerance. He's saying, well, I drank a lot without misbehaving. He's describing his life. And so I say, well, most people overcome addiction, and I repeat the Vietnam data. And most people don't become addicted to painkillers when they're prescribed them. And then he immediately shifts to, I can tell where we're going, but they don't all shift. And I say, right. And that's why we have the life process program. If they shifted, they didn't need to come here. You didn't need to go to the life process program. And then he immediately posits that that's because they have some biological susceptibility to opioids. And I go, well, A, how do you know that? You know that because they didn't not do opioids. In the Vietnam studies, they specifically studied that. The 93% of people ultimately came back and quit their opioid addiction. The 7% who didn't, and I asked him, guess what was it about them? He said, well, they probably came more often from deprived backgrounds. And I said, true. So that they were returning to something not as good. And they had already demonstrated antisocial behavior earlier. Were more likely to have criminal misbehavior. Do you believe that there's a criminal behavior gene in people's brains? And really where I'm going is, here's a guy who argued with me that he's not medically oriented, and yet his fallback position for everything is some imagined biological trait, even at the same time as they measured actual life traits. I'll just give one more example. It has nothing to do with anything. Everybody believes, and they're constantly searching for an antidote to Alzheimer's. A remarkably large number of studies have found those markers are unreliable. And I read like Medscape and Medline. They have to sneak in saying, well, surprisingly, their behavioral background is often the best predictor. For example, people who are frail are more likely to get dementia. And why is that? It's not because frailty creates the brain plaque that causes dementia. It's because somehow they're less able to be in touch with life, to be engaged, to be physically active, to consciously consider their behavior. And they almost apologize for it. They don't measure plaqueness in their brain. They report being frail at a much earlier period. They're more likely to have dementia. And so here I am talking with a person who's arguing with me how much he agrees with me, but our mindsets are very different. How do you reflect on that experience that I had, Zach?
Nobody takes the quote seriously, although it's the most damning shorthand thing I've ever heard you say, or that I feel like anyone could say. We don't ever look at a brain scan or the plaque on someone's brain, and we don't diagnose mental health things that way. So why
I said that to this guy? I said, all those people who don't get over their addiction, you believe they've measured something in their brains? Not only don't they even try, but nobody actually proposes or believes there's such a thing. They now have they call it big data solutions, where they weigh in 25 genetic factors to explain 7% of the variance.
Mm,
And when you weigh in all the genetic factors, it's meaningless.
right.
No human being can interpret what the hell all that means. It's useless clinically. Is there a better way I could deal with people like that, Zach? What is it? Object without being objectionable, or disagree without being? Can you recommend an improved approach on my part?
I wish I could. I mean, I get stuck in this conversation a lot, and it just depends on what kind of mood I'm in that day, how much I push on it. I mean, I've had meetings. I'm going to talk about my work in schools. I've had meetings with about students where people at the table are saying, um, well, we have to understand this person for their deficit, for their disability. You know, their let's say ADHD brain makes them act differently than somebody or feel things differently than somebody without an ADHD. It's a neurological difference. And I'm at a weird juncture where, one half of the table is saying, oh, come on, let's make sure there's extreme consequences on this person. And the other half is saying, no, we can't do that. We have to make sure we know that there's a neurological difference. And people think I'm agreeing with them. And then they say, no, you're just being crazy. When I say, well, we could talk about the disabilities. I'd rather just look at this as a person who does things. And we say, we like it when he does these things. And we don't really like it when he does these things. So how can we help him? That sound, nobody knows what I'm talking about. Uh, so
And
then
it's like just English, and it's not
right.
a hard concept.
It's bizarre. People are so wedded to their belief in whatever the thing is that they believe. It's so easy for them to grasp, even if it's not true, that it's hard to pry free. So in this case, sometimes I think I wince and say, "Oh, I would have done that differently." Um, I don't know that there's really a different way to approach somebody like that. We know what we know.
So you and I are, I think we can safely say, people who were at one point in our lives kind of ADHD, and maybe I'm still ADHD. Um, and I started out not worrying about that. My mother was good. My mother would say, "Oh, that's not important.
Hmm.
You're smart. What you can do well." I think you went through a ADHD period that you had to recover from.
Yeah, yeah.
And what you had to recover from typically was whatever trouble and annoyance you were getting into, plus that self concept. And there are now groups of people who say, well, there are benefits to being ADHD. And what we're talking about is, why posit some permanent identity difference in yourself, a negative one, which is made up. They don't have it. There is no such thing.
There is. I don't want to get too far out of the.
Yes, we're going away
You're
afield.
you're talking about an interviewer who said, "I'm a non-disease guy too, so we'll have a good conversation." And yet, non-disease to him meant something different. He was saying there's something rooted in biology that's different in me and my biology than my son and his biology. And you're saying, but well, I think the thing you said you're actually the definition of in my book. Um,
And somebody might say, well, you could work with him if he had that theory. But how am I going to have a discussion with him about, well, he's hours drinking, but he was delayed in doing it because of his tolerance? We're going to have that conversation.
It ultimately comes to a head somewhere, right? Exactly. So you can't really be a life partner or mentor or something like that together. I've put out in schools and other places an idea, an approach to getting people together and solving problems. And so it's almost a mistake to call it collaborative problem solving, because then people think, okay, good, I'm going to go from this tool that I have, yell at them or whatever the hell, or label them or whatever it is, to this other tool. And this other tool should solve everything. And there's an idea that I bring the tool in, things are good. And if you bring the tool in and things aren't immediately good, people say, see, doesn't work. What I'm saying is, I think that people, well, you know this, but
But
think
good.
that
This is good, Zach. Yeah, bring it out.
I think that people enjoy their pet theory because it's something that people believe in, and then they can either blame if it's not working, or that they feel like they can have some control of, um, when it comes to needing to do something about a problem. It's much more difficult in some ways, yet much more practical to say, let's just look at a person's livelihood and see what can be improved. And any improvement in these ways is improvement. It's hard work, but you can do it.
Some words we can throw out are incremental, um, are non-judgmental,
Hmm.
are non-perfectionism. I mean, human beings just, that's not how human beings live, and that's not how human beings change. And putting him in that black and white framework is not an antidote, it's an accelerant of problems. All right, Zach, I think we've made our points. So broadcast our thinking to the world, and maybe we'll inch it over, or at least some people out there who are saying, oh, God, that's how I think. I didn't know anybody was allowed to think that way.
God willing. And I bet it'll be someone from Canada.
More often than not. Au
All right.
revoir, Zach.
Bye, Stanton.